All right, you ready? Okay. We're going to call the meeting of the Camarillo City Council to order. And can I please ask for a roll call vote?
Councilmember Craven?
Here.
Councilmember Kilby?
Here.
Councilmember Tremblay? Vice Mayor Santangelo?
Here.
And Mayor Mulchay.
Present. I meant roll call, not roll call vote. The purpose of our meeting at 4:30 today is in order to go into closed session. We have a closed session item. I'm going to ask the city attorney to please read the reasons for our going into closed session.
Yes, I'll be glad to do that. Our closed session this afternoon is a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D4. Number of potential cases is 1.
All right, and I presume we have no public comment. I see no one here in the audience, so this time we will recess into closed session. We'll be back for our 5 o'clock agenda. I'm going to call to order the meeting, a special meeting of the successor agency, and let the record reflect that all members are present. Mr. Tremblay, will you lead us in the flag salute?
Please follow me in the salute to the flag. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And do we have approval of the agenda or any amendments? Seeing none. Any public comments? Does anyone want to speak to the successor agency? Seeing no one come forward, we'll move on to consent calendar.
Move consent.
Second.
I have a motion and a second by Mrs. Craven. Please vote. That passes unanimously. Any oral communications? Seeing none, we will adjourn the successor agency and call to order or reconvene the meeting of the Camarillo City Council. Please let the record reflect that all council members are present. Do we have any approval of the agenda? Any amendments to this agenda?
I thought there was.
I believe there's an amendment to the agenda.
Mayor, we were going to request that the council pull item H off the consent calendar.
Right, any
This is
objection?
an appointment to the Area Housing Authority.
Oh, okay, we will pull item H. And then it's already noted on our agenda, but I want to make mention of it to the public, that item U, the Adolfo Road Camino Ruiz traffic concerns, is going to be heard during the 7 o'clock agenda. All right, with that, we will move on to our presentations. And we have a presentation in regards to the airport land plan by County Director of Airports, Keith Freitas. Hey, Keith.
Good evening to all. First of all, I want to thank all of you. I was here, I think it's 6 months and 1 day, that started by apologizing how the airports department interacted with the community and the council members. We had started a master plan, we had stopped the master plan, and there was a lot of concerns and questions about noise, rumors about Amazon, 737s, things like that. So I wanted to come back and thank you for the invitation. I've met with each of you individually. I appreciate that, again, the time that you spent with me. We've heard you, but I wanted to kind of wrap things up and kind of where we are after 6 months. So let's dive into it, please. Oh, sorry. Way too advanced for me. Okay. That would be the forward arrow, maybe? There you go. All right. So, we back in April or so of 2021, before I had started, my predecessor started an airport master plan process. One of the things I think I talked a bit about was, and I know that the county had stopped that, we have gone back to the FAA and negotiated, and basically what we're doing is we're terminating the master plan process and basically downgrading it to what we call an airport layout plan. And I'll kind of go into the details of what that means. So why are we making the change? Again, the FAA does require that we have a current ALP. Normally you get that after going through a master plan process. But in a master plan process, you go very deep into all of the things that the airport may be. So by us downgrading it just to an ALP update, again, and listening to the feedback we got from the community, the survey that this city and city council brought back, and I think those findings were in January when I came, very clear to us that they're not looking for any changes at Camarillo Airport. So we went back to the FAA and negotiated, and basically, instead of a full-blown master plan, we're just looking at an ALP update. And bottom line, and you see in the last bullet there, is that's proposing no changes to the role of Camarillo Airport. So that's why. What does this mean? What's an ALP update? So again, it just narrowly focuses on no significant changes to what the airport current role is, but we update general things in that. But the key is, and probably the third bullet that most people are concerned about, we don't look at things like airline service, air freight, touching the length of the runway, any of those things. What we will do is update that airport layout plan so we have a list of projects that when we go to the FAA and looking for grant funding, things like upgrading the taxiways or the runways, it's on that list. It knows that it needs to be maintained, and that's what the FAA looks at and what we need to have current, and why we have to have at least an ALP update. It kind of looks at the short term, 5 to 7 years. Master plans looking out, 20 plus years. We're not doing that. So that's why we're looking just for an ALP update and what the scope of that is. Again, short-term planning study, Camarillo Airport. We need that for grant funding, current one, and grant assistance. Looking out, 5 to 7, even up to 10 years. We currently have a master plan that was done in 2011, so we'll maintain that master plan, no changes. And here's just an overview of the airport. We have a lot of pavement. Again, that's what the ALP helps us do, is highlight what those projects are, what we'll be asking for grant funding. Again, lots of pavement, runways, taxiways. We're just maintaining those. Some of those pavements are more than 30 years old. So we've got to do some requests for grants to get those projects done. So I'll, again, make this very clear in the summary. ALP update, we expect no changes to the role of the Camarillo Airport. General aviation reliever will continue to operate under the guidance of what the county signed in 1976 under the Joint Powers Agreement. And this means specifically no scheduled airline service, no freight air carrier no freight operations, and no touching length of the runway. Those are, I think, the key points that we're concerned for the community, and we've heard those folks. So as we go through these process, there'll be an opportunity for the community to input. We have standing meetings with our Aviation Advisory Commission. We have both the Oxnard and Camarillo Airport Authorities, which Mayor Mulchay and Vice Mayor Santangelo sit on. Another opportunity for the public. And then we're looking for special meetings specifically for the ALP as we go. We won't have a lot of those because we have these other forums, but there's an opportunity for the community to provide input. So that's kind of a summary. Next steps, again, we wanted to get this message out first to the city and community members, and then we'll move to go through the contract process with a consultant, which we'd expect the notice to proceed sometime in the first part of September, and then ultimately that process is a 12 to 15-month process to go through that. And as I mentioned, plenty of opportunities for the community to provide input. So I have a few other items, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this specifically first.
Do any of my colleagues have questions for Director Freitas? Mr. Kildee?
Yeah, thanks. As long as we're talking about that, in theory, it's going to take about 15 months to do this plan. What happens in the immediate time? Is it just that we adhere to the 76 agreement and it's kind of status quo as it is, and it's kind of business as usual for the most part?
It's a good question. As I mentioned, because we have a current master plan and a current ALP, we kind of just move forward with that. So that's still consistent with the 1976 JPA. So nothing changes there. We'll just kind of continue with what we're doing.
And then with that 76 agreement and then any amendments that perhaps was made under that agreement, that remains in place as well?
That does. Back in January, the county's executive officer at the time wrote the city manager to explain we're looking for no changes at this point moving forward with the JPA.
Okay. And then just really quickly, as far as the grant funding, do you anticipate some opportunities for some grant funding in the years to come, or do you think it'll be pretty much like it's been in the decades that, it's been in existence here?
Yes, grant funding is pretty consistent. Typically, nationwide, it's about $3.35 billion comes out of the Aviation Trust Fund, but that's typically what we see. As you know, there are some federal additional dollars that have been voted that we might see some additional in the next 4 to 5 years. That could happen if those funds are released. But typically for aviation across the country, airports specifically, it's about $3.3 billion.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. My question, actually, I'm asking you if you could explain a little bit about how an airport runs financially. The fact that it's an enterprise account and that this grant funding is, that's how airports get maintained. That's the process, because it's not like the airport's making millions of dollars and has a reserve account for that.
Sure, it's a good question. We are an enterprise fund, so we do not take local tax dollars at all to operate. There's between the two airports, about 85 businesses on the airport, aviation, non-aviation. So all revenue in from those businesses is about $9 million. So that's how we generally operate. And then you talk about grant funding. Those funds, the $3.35 billion annually I've talked about, when you purchase an airline ticket, that goes into portion of that, about 7.5% of that airline ticket goes into the Aviation Trust Fund, so that all the airports in the master plan for the entire airport system in the United States, and there's about 3,300 airports in that system, all get funds to, and I'll use Camarillo as an example, new runway or taxiways. The important part of these smaller airports is to relieve the smaller light airplane traffic from the bigger airports, LAX and Burbank. And the example I like to use is, could you imagine what Highway 101 would look like every day if all the kids going to school on their bikes and their skateboards all were on 101? You already know how slow it can be at times, but if you threw all that traffic there, well, that's what curbs and sidewalks and smaller roads are for. That's what Camarillo and Oxnard airports do, is they remove that traffic from LAX and Burbank to keep things moving more efficiently. So that's where the bigger funding, the grant funding comes from the FAA to help with larger capital projects. But the day-to-day operations, as I mentioned, we generate ourselves about $9 million. We do not take any county general fund, any local city taxes or anything like that. It's an enterprise fund, self-generating, almost like a business.
Thank you, because I wanted the public to understand, because I didn't realize this before I was an active member of the council and on the airport authority, but how much of what is done at airports is reliant on getting that grant funding. So having the requirements like this ALP needs to be in place so that we can continue to get that funding.
Yes. And by example, the most recent runway project we did at Oxnard Airport was a $14 million overlay. I mean, that's a significant, with our budget being $9 million, that is a significant capital project.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Yeah, I think Mr. Freitas has some additional items he's
I
gonna
just
wanna
had a
touch on.
couple additional comments that I wanted to make, is in all of this comes back to the community and concerns about growth and other issues, and mostly about noise. I do want to point out what we're doing. First of all, the mayor has called us directly when we had some calls about some late night operations. We immediately will investigate that, and we've committed that we monthly will follow up with the city if we've got some operators that are outside of the JPA agreement. We had a couple last month where we wrote those operators a letter explaining that they were outside the operating, and typically those pilots would not have any issues with them, but want to commit to that we'll continue to do that. The other big ones that we're doing, specifically 2 weeks ago, we hired for the first time our public information officer. We've never had one before that would be dedicated to our noise office. We've got some new technology, some flight tracking system that we're going to install by the end of the year to help that person. But the key is working with pilots and the community to understand what the issues are so that we can be the best neighbor that we can be. So that's happening, those two things. And the last is we did put in for an FAA grant, Part 150 noise study, where we basically study noise issues specifically for Camarillo, and it looks nationwide for what other airports are doing, again, techniques and practices to help be better neighbors. So those are in place right now. Just wanted to kind of share that because they're kind of important. And again, that position just opened up 2 weeks ago. We expect to do interviews and have a person on board, I'd say in August. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Mr. Tremblay, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Keith, for being here. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the very, very clear and succinct presentation. Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of questions on noise, because originally, as I understood it, first of all, you have provided a breath of fresh air, so I really want to compliment you for this process. I had understood, at least anecdotally, that prior to moving with the airport land use process, you were going to do the county was going to do the noise study, a formal noise study. But it sounds like that is not the case. It sounds like what you've done is pivot to this airport land plan update, then can you tell us then where, and if I understood, you've put in for an FAA a Part 150 grant relative, is that to fund the noise study that you were contemplating proceeding with?
That is correct, yes.
Is the receipt of the grant funds for that noise, I'm sorry, is that noise study contingent upon receiving the grant funds from FAA
Yes.
to complete the study?
Yes.
What would you anticipate the expense of that? This might be an unfair question, but do you have a ballpark for what the expense of that noise study might be?
I do, because we just submitted $795,000.
Okay, all right. And so, again, so you have not moved forward on it yet. You're waiting to see what the,
All I can tell you is the FAA we should know in the next, 30 to 60 days. I can tell you it's been looked upon favorably. We've asked for a noise study at both airports at this point. And at this point, the feedback from FAA staff is that it looks supportive for that. Now, they've got to go make their argument to region, and it kind of moves up in the FAA process. But it's on the radar. And the key is, if for some reason they didn't fund it this year, it would be immediately on for the next request.
okay. And we received an email today from a resident, I think it was forwarded to you, just having a few questions about that noise study.
Yes.
So I just wanted to ask you about that so we could get an answer. One of them is with respect to the 1976 JPA, and its reference to a 60 CNEL average noise. But the study apparently that is contemplated is contemplating use of a different number, a 65 CNEL. Could you comment on from a consistency standpoint?
I can.
Review on that?
The 65 CNL, which is quoted by the consultant, is the national standard, which is why that's in there. That's not to say that we couldn't ask for. It might be something we'd have to fund ourselves. But doing contours, that's probably something that's not too expensive to add it down to the down to the 60 CNL as requested.
I guess my thought would be simply from a contemplative standpoint, from a consistency standpoint, rather, it would be better to have it at a 60 CNL, since that would be consistent with the 76
Right.
agreement.
And the only reason it's at the 65 is that's the national standard, which is, the consultant had put that in because that's what is typical.
Right, okay.
Yep.
And then I think the other segment of the questions had to do with, how do you do your sampling for that, and how is all that done? How do you pick the sampling locations? How many days do you do it? How is that? Can you just kind of walk us through, without specific reference to this, but how do you do it generically?
Yeah, I mean, the CNL, basically, and that's, it is an average, a 24-hour average. So if you stood on that line, the average decibels would be 65. So that means, at 2 o'clock in the morning, it might be 30.
Okay.
And, in the middle of the day with traffic and all those other things, it might be, 100, depending but the average 24 hours is a 65. So what they do and again, I'm open, and we would be open to more sampling but I'm sure that was what they proposed, is what their typical standard is. But what they're really looking is the type of airplanes, and they already have a lot of that data, but they go out and verify it, what kind of airplanes are landing, because you just need the number of Cessna 172s and corporate jets, and then you plug that into a model, and that gives you the contours, wind direction and other things, the common frequency of which end of the runway they're landing and taking off. So all that goes into the model, but the short days, a few days, is typically just a person looking and verifying, here's what happened in a select few amount of days.
Does that, just a couple quick more, does that vary, the questions really kind of went to, does that provide an adequate set of data for the consultant to draw some conclusions and the locations, et cetera. But for an airport like Camarillo, Camarillo is unique in many ways, I would think, but at the same time, you could categorize it together with other general aviation airports across the country. But would you characterize it as unique in terms of the variability in your data locations and sampling from other? And I'm thinking, so for example, I'm thinking of a general aviation airport in Santa Monica or Van Nuys or something like that, which might be very different from an urban interface standpoint than Camarillo. On the other hand, Camarillo has so many different things going on with it in terms of airport activity. How do you arrive at that sweet spot for purposes of deciding how you're going to sample something? I think I've asked you about 4 questions rolled into one. Sorry about that.
As any good attorney would, I'm sure, do.
Well, I believe in compound questions. Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me just say, I'm not the expert in it, so I hate to get into the weeds per se to answer all of those things. We kind of rely on our consultant, the expert, to answer those. But with that said, in the airport business, we've said if you've seen one airport, you've seen one airport. You're right. They're very unique. And we rely on the consultant to use all of the data. Again, they have a lot of strong data that comes in, from the air traffic control folks of what types of airplanes, what hours they come in, and things like that. They typically put monitors out in the community. Again, they do people observations. It's kind of, we rely on them. But that doesn't mean that we can't tweak it a bit if we have any questions. But they have a very specific, we're doing this once every, maybe 15 years. They've done 100, in the last couple of years. I mean, that's what we rely on our consultants to help us with that process.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And just one more question. So what I'm walking away with, though, is the sense that prior to the county proceeding down this path in terms of a noise study, assuming that the grant funds come in, there would be an opportunity for public input relative to the study methodology and how things would be accomplished.
No question.
Am I correct?
Again, that same document that was published will be before we, go before the board locking in. We have ability to adjust it and answer those questions and/or make modifications.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any additional questions? Keith, I had one, and you might have already answered it. But in terms of the noise study, they're not just looking for the noise on airport grounds. They go out into the community, land adjacent to either takeoff or landing, or approach and takeoff, and they study the noise generated by those incoming or outgoing planes?
That is correct, yes. I mean, the contour is this, how far does that noise go out from the airport, leaving the property, and where does that end up?
All right. Ms. Santangelo?
I'm back. One more question, but it's a big one. Where do you think the Board of Supervisors, the County Board of Supervisors are with reaffirming the agreement from 1976 with us?
Well, I obviously don't want to answer for them, but in my conversations with individual supervisors, they support the 1976 JPA, in that I think it was strengthened by the letter that, again, came from the CEO to the city manager in January. And when I first came in, the first question was, has everything been pretty much working pretty well for the last 45 years? And on both sides, the answer was yes. So my question was, why are we messing with that? And that's kind of why we are where we are. And, we're building that relationship. I meet monthly with the city manager. As I mentioned, the mayor and vice mayor sit on our airport authority. Got to open that communication, because otherwise, what fills in are the rumors. Amazon's coming, airline service, we're not doing that. So let's shut that down. I had a young lady call me yesterday, Allison, from the neighborhood, and asked me all those same questions, and I rattled through those, and I invited her to attend or watch online, and she said, well, I'm going to share that with my friends. So that's what we need to get the word out.
Thank you.
All right, I'm back one more time, because you brought it up, so, but.
I thought there was only one question at a time. Wait a minute.
So Amazon, just to put it to bed, because I still get I'm still fielding questions from time to time about that.
Yes.
You have not had any discussions with Amazon. The county has not had discussions with Amazon. There is no plan, to your knowledge, of Amazon. Any kind of operation of the airport.
Yes, when I first came, that was the first question, because I saw it plastered all over the media. There was nobody that I've talked to in the county that knows of any discussions with Amazon. I know that there was a large facility in Oxnard, a couple miles, 2-3 miles away, that was built. So candidly, the best I can find is that there was a competing hangar development that wanted to kind of mess with another hangar development and kind of threw some of those rumors out there, and it kind of spun out. I'm old school, so social media isn't my favorite thing, but I see that it kind of it gets sometimes out of control. So I'm here to put those answers there, and if anybody wants to call and ask, happy to answer those. But yes, no. Answer is no.
All right. Thank you. Oh, Kevin?
Yeah, Again, thanks for being here. That information officer that you were going to hire, have you hired that individual yet? Is that still pending, or? where are
Yes,
we
it's
now?
been, so it was advertised 2 weeks ago, so this week, we'll probably pull the first round of names for start interviews. Again, I hope to have that person on board, I'd say by the end of August.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
All right, Director Freitas, thank you for coming. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you all.
Thanks for fielding the questions.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, we're going to move on to consent calendar.
Move the approval, and that's with the exception of the item that was pulled,
Item H.
item H.
All right, and then I need to announce, I'm going to abstain from item N. That's the city streets and sidewalk, Mission Oaks area. Mission Oaks, just within 500 feet of my home. So I'm going to abstain in the consent from item N. So with that, we have a motion and a set. And H is not included. We have pulled H. All right, with that, please vote. And that passes unanimously with myself abstaining from item N and excluding item H. All right, with that, we're going to our public hearing, annual updates on the user fee schedule. And we have a staff presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is, I have a brief verbal presentation, and then we'll put up the recommended action on the slide. But when we're talking about the city's user fees, we're talking about fees for services that benefit a specific customer that's requesting a service. For example, a conditional use permit, an environmental review for a project, as opposed to general services provided by the city, such as police services, street lighting, library services, for which we don't charge specific fees. The city's existing user fees were adopted in 2019 following a comprehensive fee study that determined the actual cost of providing the city services. The city cannot charge more than the actual cost to provide the service. And in most cases, the fees have been set to be 100% cost recovery. Per city policy, the user fees will be reviewed and updated annually to ensure that they're keeping pace with the cost of providing the service. Inflation concerns. The policy states that the user fees shall be calculated annually to reflect the adjustment for any year-over-year change in labor costs. And for this year, the labor cost increase is 10.44%, and all of the fees in the schedule have been increased by that amount, with the exception of a few fees that have maximums set by the state. So that concludes the brief presentation, and available for questions. Otherwise, it would be opening the public hearing.
Do we have any questions? Yeah, Mr. Tremblay?
Just a question for clarification, Mark, something we had chatted about. There are certain fees that the council, as a matter of policy, said we're going to do less than 100% cost recovery. With respect to those fees, there will be increases to those fees to address the year-over-year cost of living or labor cost increase, but not otherwise putting them up to the 100% cost recovery level. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So they'll still maintain, notwithstanding doing the adjustment, the year-over-year adjustment relative to inflation and labor cost, they still will remain below the 100% cost recovery level from a policy standpoint, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any additional questions? Otherwise, I will, at this time, all right, I'll open the public hearing. And do we have anyone who wants to speak on this item? Annual updates to the user fee schedule. Don't you all rush up all at once now. All right. With that, we're going to close the public, and I don't have any comment cards? No, okay. We will close the public hearing and move to discussion.
Move the approval.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Please vote. We're all waiting in suspense. All right, and it passes unanimously. So with that, we are going to move on to our discussion items. Item T, local road safety plan.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and City Council. The Public Works Department is really pleased to be presenting the local road safety plan tonight to council for adoption. This has been a significant effort over a couple years, culmination of very deliberate efforts by many stakeholders, all for the sole purpose of improving the safety of all users of Camarillo roads. Principal Engineer Andrew Grubb in our CIP division has been the lead staff on seeing this project to this point, and he will be providing a presentation tonight.
Thanks, Dave. Good evening, Mayor Milche and council members. Staff is pleased to be here to present the local road safety plan. The plan being presented here today has been a culmination of 2 years and countless hours spread among the many stakeholders who generously provided their time addressing Camarillo's safety needs. The plan was kicked off in August 2020, and shortly after, staff held the first stakeholder working group meeting in December to start to identify the challenge areas specific to Camarillo. Staff then opened the social pinpoint site to public comment between January and July 2021. During that time, staff and the consultant team began to analyze the traffic data and brought the initial findings to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in June 2021 to set the mission, vision, and goals and review the challenge areas identified. Following the committee meeting, the recommendations were brought to the second stakeholder working group meeting in July 2021 to review public comments and the committee's feedback. Staff and the consultant team then developed the plan from the input received, and on May 19th, the draft plan was presented to the committee. At that time, we did not think we'd make this year's grant deadline to submit an application for the Cycle 11 Highway Safety Improvement Program. So we'd like to thank the committee for their valuable feedback at that meeting and the direction to expedite bringing the plan to the council for recommended adoption. With council's approval of the recommended actions, staff will start right away on applying for the grant and putting this plan into action. So before we start, I'd like to thank the many stakeholders listed here that contributed to the plan's development. These stakeholders represented a broad cross-section of our community, including public safety, fire, healthcare, education, and advocacy groups. Their input helped to shape the plan specific to Camarillo's needs, so thank you to all those involved. So what is a local road safety plan and what is its purpose? The local road safety plan is a data-driven, proactive, and holistic planning process that sets the framework for identifying countermeasures to address Camarillo's roadway safety needs. Similar to building a house, we now have the foundation and the walls. After the plan's adoption, we will start to add the roof, paint, furniture, and of course the cabinets. The process started with identifying roadway concerns specific to Camarillo through our extensive stakeholder and community engagement. Next was identifying and recommended safety improvements that could address these concerns through the countermeasures discussed later in the presentation. Once we have identified countermeasures, the next step was implementation. With our city's operations budget or larger projects that get added to the 5-year capital improvement program. In the meantime, staff will continue to research and pursue grant funding to leverage our local funds wherever possible. Finally, the plan is intended to be a living document. After 5 years, staff will evaluate the results and modify the plan if necessary. The local road safety plan is a 6-step safety planning process and based on the principles of the Safe Systems approach. That responsibility for roadway safety is shared between all users. Following this approach, staff brought together representatives from all 5 E's of traffic safety: engineering, enforcement, education, emergency services, and emerging technologies, to shape the plan and play an important role in its implementation. One of the first steps to develop the plan was to identify a mission, vision, and goals to set the framework for future planning and decision-making moving forward. Staff, in coordination with our stakeholder working group meeting and the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, established these early in the process to set the direction for developing the plan. First, our mission, to develop a comprehensive safety plan with the engagement of stakeholders and citizens to proactively improve roadway safety throughout the city. Our vision is to strive towards the elimination of all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all. Our goals strive to eliminate the fatal and severe injury collisions citywide, reduce the potential for broadside and approach turn collisions citywide, which were found to be the highest crash type throughout the city, with targeted and systemic safety improvements, reduce speeding and improper turning related collisions, improve the health and vitality of our community with a roadway safety plan targeted to Camarillo's needs, improve safety around schools using speed management and connected multimodal infrastructure, and improve multimodal transportation safety by expanding the city's non-motorized transportation infrastructure to encourage walking, biking, rolling, and the use of mass transit. While the intent of the local road safety plan is to establish new traffic safety goals and recommendations for meeting those goals, it's also intended to memorialize the many existing and ongoing traffic safety efforts already in place. Starting with traffic signals and upgrades. For example, the Las Postas and Temple traffic signal replacement currently in design will provide a longer mast arm and flashing yellow arrows. Crossing enhancements, which will includes crosswalk striping and pedestrian actuated LEDs. New bikeways, such as the Pleasant Valley Road Bike Lanes project, also in design. Educational campaigns, such as the Sheriff Department's ongoing outreach to community members with a focus on distracted and impaired driving and bicycle and pedestrian safety. Enforcement and first responders, who not only take steps towards preventing collisions, but they're the first to arrive at the scene if they do occur. Accessibility upgrades, including ongoing replacement of sidewalk, curb ramps, and pedestrian push buttons. And finally, capital projects in our 5-year capital improvement program that improve roadway safety. Following our first stakeholder working group meeting in 2020, the consultant and staff pulled collision data from 2015 to 2019 from a statewide database called the Statewide Integrated Traffic Record System, more commonly referred to as SWITRs. Every time a police officer uploads a collision report to SWITRs, they record the time, location, number of people involved, type of collision, and if any injuries were reported. This data becomes important for observing collision patterns and identifying appropriate countermeasures. Over that time, there were 2,763 collisions on city roads and another 270 within State Route 34 and US 101 interchanges. This does not include collisions on mainline US 101. This heat map shows the relative collision density over that time frame, with the areas shown in blue being the lowest density and the red being the highest. As shown here, the collisions are generally concentrated in those high-volume corridors, such as Las Posas, Ponderosa, and Arneal. This next graph shows collisions on city roads categorized by severity. Starting from the bottom, where blue, representing about half of collisions, resulted in property damage only. Gold shows collisions resulting in a complaint of pain. Pink, collisions resulting in visible injury. Orange, representing severe injury. And red, representing fatal collisions. The data used to develop the report ranged between 2015 and 2019. In March 2020, the COVID pandemic began, and as more workplaces and educational facilities went remote, it had a noticeable and immediate effect on traffic volumes. So it's important to note that while we now have collision data from 2020 and 2021, shown here, this data was observed to be an anomaly due to the relatively low traffic volumes compared to pre-pandemic traffic volumes and patterns, and was therefore not used in the weighted priority intersections or segments shown in the plan. If there's any good news from the past 2 years, it's that we are trending towards the right direction. Compared to pre-pandemic average of 553 collisions per year, Camarillo experienced a 32% decrease in 2020 and 26% decrease in 2021, with 0 fatalities reported. Although there was a slight uptick in overall collisions in 2021, Staff will continue to monitor traffic patterns for the next traffic update planned in 2027 to see what traffic patterns emerge in this new normal of hybrid and remote work. So before I move on, are there any questions on how we chose that data or to this point?
You're all good?
In January 2021, we began engaging the community to get their input, posting a survey and interactive map online where anyone from the public could drag and drop a comment to a specific location and describe their concern. This outreach was done in parallel to social media posts, email through our city newsletter, a news release in our local papers, and a feature on our local government City Scene TV. The website was live for 6 months, and during that time, we received over 250 map comments and 75 survey responses. Staff reviewed the comments and developed a frequently asked questions sheet that was posted on the city's website and can be found in the appendices. Once we reviewed the data and engaged the public to identify those traffic safety concerns specific to Camarillo, the next question was, how can we use the 5 E's to address them? This will be done through proven safety countermeasures. So again, starting with engineering and the 5 E's, Caltrans regularly updates the local roadway safety manual, which is a list of established traffic safety countermeasures with corresponding crash reduction factors. The list is currently up to 82 countermeasures, each of which go through a research process to ensure that they meet traffic safety standards before making the list. Staff will review the safety improvement countermeasures identified in the plan and start to pursue grant funding for the short-term, easier-to-implement projects, and longer-term, higher-cost projects will be developed further and included in the city's 5-year capital improvement program. So here's a few examples of those lower-cost, easier-to-implement improvements. Again, improved signage and striping, frequently requested during the public engagement process. Retro-reflective backplates, variable speed limit signs, rumble strips, removing or relocating fixed objects outside of the clear recovery zone. On the capital side, upgrading traffic signal controllers to add leading pedestrian intervals, which starts the pedestrian crossing sign before the traffic signal turns green, making pedestrians more visible to drivers. Upgraded controllers and new signal heads will allow for flashing yellow arrows. These will be incorporated again into the Las Posas Temple intersection project currently in design and further evaluated at Las Posas and Carmen and Ponderosa and Carmen, 2 other intersections high on the priority list. Pedestrian safety was a frequent concern during the public engagement process, and pedestrian crossing enhancements will be further evaluated at intersections where warranted. So throughout the process, we engage stakeholders from all 5 E's of traffic safety who play an important role in the plan's implementation, starting with enforcement. Targeted patrols can lead to a reduction in collisions related to those challenge areas specific to Camarillo, including speeding, distracted driving, and intersections. Impaired driving is also a major concern voiced in our engagement, and their ongoing enforcement and campaigns play an important part in reducing those collisions. Continuing with education. These countermeasures typically cost less than infrastructure, but go a long way in having a big impact on traffic safety. Through targeted campaigns, we can address these specific challenge areas using our social media platforms and outreach tools already in place to proactively spread awareness before a collision occurs. Emergency response. Countermeasures to reduce the time to respond to the scene of an accident. And then the last E most recently added was emerging technologies. During the plan's development, we saw one of the most drastic year-over-year changes in traffic patterns in recent history. While it's true that some of the traffic patterns are slowly returning, with more companies adopting remote work policies, the new normal and evolving technology continue to change both how and how often we use our roads. Listed here are some of those emerging technologies that can lead to a reduction in collisions, from intelligent transportation systems, enhanced bicycle detection, to improved pavement striping that can be more easily detected by autonomous vehicles. So now that we've identified the countermeasures, how do we implement them? Today, staff is recommending that council adopt the local road safety plan and authorize staff to apply for this year's Cycle 11 Highway Safety Improvement Program grant. Staff is reviewing the grant criteria and will develop a scope that may include systemic improvements such as reflective backplates and upgraded controllers to allow for those leading pedestrian intervals and flashing yellow arrows. The grant is due on September 12th. Over the next year, staff will review the recommended countermeasures outlined in the plan and start to identify if they can be implemented as part of the operating budget or developed into next spring into the 5-year capital improvement program. Finally, the plan will be reviewed again in 2027 to cover that 2022 to 2026 traffic data as staff continues to evaluate and update the plan as traffic patterns, behaviors, and emerging technologies continue to change the way we navigate our roads. And just one note, after the agenda report was published, staff identified a minor clerical change and recommends replacing the last sentence in section 3.12 as shown here. So now for staff's recommended actions. One, adopt a resolution approving the local road safety plan, including the revision noted in the previous slide, and authorize the city manager to execute documents as may be necessary for the highway safety improvement grant funding. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And do we have any questions? Kevin?
Thanks for being, I found this fascinating, very comprehensive report here with a lot of data that is quantifiable and is somewhat easy to understand here, but I especially appreciated your first kind of comments about this is a working document here, that we're going to keep working on this. We don't necessarily have the funding to do everything at one time, of course, and there'll be a lot of grant opportunities. But the question I have, without getting into a lot of specifics, is staff and or the council, of course, are we going to prioritize about what intersections and areas of the city that need, to be addressed somewhat earlier than others? And if that's the case, do we apply for that grant, or perhaps will there be funding there to pick the low-hanging fruit first, if you will? So that's my first question I have here.
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of it will depend on the grant funding. Again, we're reviewing the requirements of that HSIP grant, and that's going to help immediately implement some of that low-hanging fruit, as you said. We'll look first to identify those low-cost systemic improvements that we can apply over corridors. And again, the idea of this plan is to try not to chase the hot spots so much in the intersections that just have the most collisions, but rather address corridors such as Las Posas and Ponderosa and Arneal. And that way we get ahead of the intersections that may not come up as high on the list.
And then just my follow-up question for folks like me that have been driving for a while, and we see a new sign. Will there be some public outreach about what specifically this sign means? So if you're like myself and just driving down the road and I see the traffic signal here and a new sign, I think I know what they mean, but in other words, will it be some other, some public outreach that we can make sure that we try to get that message out that, hey, you're going to see some changes on, the traffic controlled intersections here, and this is, precisely what it means. Will there be some outreach in that, in that form?
That's correct. We plan to publish that through our social media outlets and get that word out, closer to that when that traffic signal is installed. And I think the first one we have is this Las Posas Temple intersection that's going to bid very soon. Once that's installed and operating, we'll want to get that outreach out so that everyone's aware of how to use that intersection, and that, especially that flashing arrow, yellow arrow, that may be new to drivers. So.
And just my last, I won't take any more time, but there have been some instances here with DUIs, and will that be addressed in the future in this report and how we will deal with it in the future. And there's several things that they do at this particular point. Is there anything new that may be on the horizon as far as that goes?
Yeah, and I think that's the difference with this plan is really it's a collection with all 5 of those E's, and it's going to be a collaboration with the sheriff's department, figuring out ways where we can get ahead of those DUIs and try to engage those through campaigns, outreach, safe rides from local restaurants and bars that may serve patrons alcohol. So I think that's going to be an ongoing effort, something we address, and really included in this plan is that collaboration and that, really everyone plays a part in that traffic safety. So all road users, it's a responsibility shared, as I mentioned. There's things we can do as public works staff and from the engineering standpoint and the sheriff's department, but we're going to rely on those drivers to make responsible choices at the end of the day. So.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have. Thank you.
Additional questions?
Comment.
Do we have any public comment? Nothing submitted? Andrew, I had one question for you. We talked about doing the next update in 2027. As part of that update, do we look back on the last 5 years and look at whatever we do get funding for, things that we do, countermeasures that we do in fact implement? Do we measure whether or not those are effective, how effective they are in trying to mitigate whatever it is, whatever kind of issue, whether it's pedestrian collisions or, fender benders or whatever? But do we follow up to measure that, to see what is effective and what is not?
That's correct, and that'll be part of that update, is observing, again, going through a similar process where we analyze that data and observe, have there been reductions? We're already seeing that in areas where we put signals that there weren't before. We'll monitor those before and after to see the changes in collision patterns. And again, hopefully over the next 5 years, we're going to monitor that in traffic patterns and how those change and see where we implement these solutions. Again, like you mentioned, we'll evaluate that and monitor that for the next update.
All right. Comments? Mrs. Craven?
Yes, it was a very comprehensive report, very good, and I hope we get the results we're hoping for.
Thank you.
Just a couple of comments. First of all, I just wanted to compliment you and compliment staff and the consultant for the work on the plan. It was not insubstantial. We had 2 Transportation and Infrastructure Committee meetings on this, and if it's okay to say, I don't think the mayor and I are known for being reticent with questions. We asked a lot of questions during the process. One of the really good things about this, this represents having a local road safety plan, aside from being specifically important for federal HSIP grant funding. It also helps focus our projects in the 5-year CIP. It helps us focus on the traffic corridors, and it really represents a core value of a city in terms of promoting traffic safety for our folks who are using the roads. So anyway, I want to compliment you, and I'll be happy to make the motion, but I think there are some other comments.
I think Ms. Intencio?
I want to thank you and staff and the consultants as well. Mr. Kildee said it perfectly. It was fascinating. We're in this world of social media, and so you hear about car accidents and you see them posted, and you think that that is not, although it's interesting, it's anecdotal, and it's not how you should be basing plans and spending money and finding measures that will really be effective. So the amount of data in here was just mind-blowing, and I'm probably going to read it again because it really is interesting, and it really is interesting to see where you live and where these problem areas are. And as far as I can tell from this report, that it was pretty obvious. So I was kind of fascinated by the process as well. I also just found the other thought that I had as going through this was, how do we prioritize this? Okay, what do we do first? And I found page 54 really helpful, that grouped the things together that made sense, and how you were talking about maybe not just one item, but looking at the whole corridor, the whole project, and then also looking at, systemic things. So I was equally impressed by all of the suggestions that I was like, oh, well, why didn't we think of that? That's why we do these plans, right? Because we can't think of everything, and we're not experts in everything, but when you hire a consultant who can really drill this data down and analyze it well, and then provide, things that we know are industry proven, then it's really helpful for us. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll just simply add, this report is thorough, and it is rife with plenty of data. I always like to say, data is absolutely worthless if you just let it sit there. You have to turn it into actionable data. It has to inform a strategy or decisions, or in this case, different countermeasures. Well, identifying the issues first off, and then identifying what the potential countermeasures can be to address and mitigate those systemic issues. So this is really, really thorough. For anyone who hasn't read it, it is really interesting. If you like data and information, there is a ton here, and it's very informative. So Andrew, you have been great through this entire process. You've given presentations to, as Tony had mentioned, the Transportation Subcommittee. So very, very thorough. And we threw a lot of questions at you during those committee meetings, and you guys had plenty of answers. So greatly appreciate it. Mr. Tremblay, you had mentioned that you...
I'm happy to move both recommendations.
I'll second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Please vote. That passes unanimously.
Thank you.
We have item U. We had mentioned that we're going to move that to our 7 o'clock agenda, but I wanted to be, if there's anyone here who wanted to speak on, I guess technically I would we'd open this item in case anyone wanted to speak on it here, because I know that there was a kind of a last-minute change on this. Does anyone in the audience want to speak on item U, Adolfo Road? Otherwise, we're going to take it up during the 7 o'clock. No? Okay. So in this case, we're going to take it up to 7 o'clock, and we'll just move on to oral communications. Who do I pick on first? Mr. Tremblay, can I pick on you? Start? Sure. Okay.
All right, thank you. Meetings attended, June 24, the Metrolink Board of Directors meeting. On June 26th, I attended the Pleasant Valley Historical Society groundbreaking together with the mayor. On June 27, a Utilities Committee meeting. On June 28 and July 1, outreach meetings with Leisure Village and the Grove residents. And I want to thank Michelle Dana for her preparatory efforts, particularly with respect to the meeting at the Grove. On July 8, we had a Ventura County Transportation Commission meeting. And on July 9th, and I think all of us were there, was the Arneal Ranch reopening for Pleasant Valley Recreation and Park District. Kathy and I lived on Centennial, and you used that track almost every day when we lived in that area. So the Recreation and Park District did a beautiful job, and it was a really nice grand reopening. I do want to spend a little bit of time with you just to give you an update on some of the transportation matters and water matters. At the Metrolink Board of Directors meeting on June 24. First of all, and thank you, Christy, I had asked Christy to share hard copies of a transportation article with you on transit ridership, and the headline kind of speaks for itself. It says, "Transit ridership not expected to return to pre-pandemic levels this decade." And it speaks to both bus as well as rail ridership, and it kind of typifies some of the challenges, and I really commend it to your reading. It kind of typifies some of the challenges that are facing public transit agencies right now. For example, with Metrolink, the ridership and the revenue recently has plateaued. So, of course, during the pandemic, everything plummeted completely. The service levels went way down. Well, it started coming back, but it has plateaued. It continues to lag behind projections. In fact, at Metrolink, per se, the CEO has tasked Metrolink staff with coming up with suggestions for a 10% in cost reduction savings for fiscal year '23, which means not restoring full service in October. So you have kind of the nub of the issue, and it's not just rail, it affects everything, right? From a public transit standpoint, which is so, I think we all agree that public transit is an essential service, and many folks utilize it. But here's the difficulty. Do you restore service with ridership still behind? You have farebox revenue requirements you're trying to meet. In other words, what do? Do you fully restore it and hope that the ridership is ultimately going to come along? Fortunately, from a bus ridership standpoint in Ventura County, a little higher than on the Metrolink rail side, but this article actually does a pretty good job of giving you some of the issues that the transit agencies, particularly the urban transit agencies, are struggling with. And so, for example, with Metrolink, service restoration is at 90% as of July 1, as of a few days ago, and it's supposed to be at 100% as of October of this year. But they only added one new service line, which is the Ventura line, on the weekends beginning in April of 2023. So what do you do now when ridership has plateaued? What do you go ahead and restore that, but then you have that continuing O&M expense of maintaining that? The ridership recovery forecast was 43% as of the fourth quarter. That's the forecast for the fourth quarter of this year. So that's that's 57% below where you were pre-pandemic. To give you an idea on that from a fiscal standpoint, because I think it's important, because we're part of the Ventura County member agencies for the Ventura County Transportation Commission, the operating revenues for Metrolink for the 22-23 budget are $64 million. The expenditures are just south of $297 million. So you have a $64 million operating revenue budget and a $297 million expenditure budget, and the farebox revenues are only about $45 million. So where do you get that money? Well, that's operating support from all of the member agencies, including Ventura County, San Bernardino, LA, Orange, of about, it's in excess of $232 million. So obviously the member agencies at Metrolink are looking at this going, okay, we have to monitor this closely throughout the year. The VCTC share of that is about $13.5 million. So just to give you some context. So we're kind of on the small side relative to this huge amount of support, but still it's pretty substantial. Metrolink also adopted a brand refresh update, and I just want to continue to remind people from a Metrolink standpoint that there is still the $15 summer day pass and the $10 weekend day pass with the kids ride free. On the VCT side, I'm sorry, I know I'm going on a little bit of length on transportation, but if I can just get a couple more minutes. On the Ventura County Transportation Commission side, there are a number of things that have been going on, particularly legislatively in the governor's budget. That includes $15 billion for transportation infrastructure statewide, including just over $3.5 billion for the Transit and Intercity Rail Improvement Program. And so there's a very large amount of money in there to try to improve that ridership. And then there is a large amount of money for the what's called the Active Transportation Program and the Clean California Program, et cetera. A lot of that is with respect to improving improving bicycle transportation and biking and walking, et cetera. So there is obviously a lot of money that the legislature is putting in. And remember, there was a huge budget surplus, so it's not surprising. It also includes, for example, $4.2 billion for California's high-speed rail project, which of course has been controversial. And that particular funding is meant for the Bakersfield to Merced loop. So anyway, there's a lot going on in terms of the governor's budget relative to transportation funding. Okay, pivoting to water, because we don't end up talking about water enough here, do we? That's a joke. The Drought Task Force had a meeting on June 22. Several local officials and agencies sent a joint letter to Metropolitan Water District in support of our mayor's May 29 letter, saying they agreed with Mayor Mulchay on what the city of Camarillo is asking for in terms of emergency action from Metropolitan Water District, asking for immediate action on improving the conveyance infrastructure along the lines of what the city of Camarillo has outlined. We'll see what happens. We know that Metropolitan Water District staff is working on those issues. We're looking forward to another meeting coming up with them. We believe they're going to go back to their board in August and September with hopefully some specific, discernible commitments, both in terms of projects and money and timelines. But there's nothing, it doesn't look like there's anything immediately that they can do, but there's certainly things that they can do over the midterm. And I'm talking about the next couple of years to try to improve conveyance infrastructure so our area is not treated like second-class citizens within Metropolitan. So I know Metropolitan's Water District staff has been working hard on this, so has Callegas, so I'm happy to see that. The next drought task force meeting is on July 27th, and I'll report back that night to council on how Callegas member agencies and state water project dependent agencies are doing on water conservation. But really quickly, just through June 30, Callegas, the member agencies within Callegas were still, in terms of reducing imported water use, City of Camarillo was at about a static level in terms of whether or not it was using less water than Metropolitan had been asking for. Camarosa is 27% under the 27% over what the projections, what they want the projections to be. But in terms of the Callegas member agencies, they are 17% over Metropolitan's requested target levels, which is not real good. All of the state water project, though, dependent agencies within Metropolitan were about 4% under. So, you know, they're doing overall better. So we've got a long way to go. We all agree water conservation is critical. We need to do everything we can, but we got a long ways to go. September, as we've talked about, is going to be particularly critical in terms of deciding whether, or Metropolitan deciding whether it's going to go to an additional, two additional restrictions, and then by the end of the year, whether or not we go to an entirely new schematic in terms of volumetric allocation of state water. So there's an awful lot going on. So what we can do now is important, is critically important over the next few months. So anyway, that's a really long transportation and water update. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Mrs. Craven, we'll skip over you. You have a history lesson, I think, for us in order? Okay. Ms. Santangelo?
Okay, for meetings attended July 7th, CPA Board of Directors, and on July 8th, I attended a flag ceremony for the Camarillo Healthcare Center. They belong to a larger organization, the Ensign Company, and they were awarded this flag for meeting all of their clinical and administrative benchmarks, something out of over 300 facilities, and there are 17 of these flags awarded, and it's Camarillo Healthcare's, it's the third flag they've received. So it was a really great celebration. A lot of people there, and they really spent some time really celebrating their employees for sticking it out through COVID. So that was nice. I was at the July 9th reopening of our Neal Ranch, and it's also the park that my kids spent all their time because they could ride their bikes to it, and I was just so impressed. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. Please go out and make good use of it, or if you don't want to, at least drive by and see it because it's beautiful. And then I also wanted to mention that on June 26, Camarillo had its first Pride Festival, and it was attended by hundreds of people, and it was families and lots of people and lots of vendors, and it was a really great event. So just wanted to speak about that.
Thank you, Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, thanks. See, June 23rd, I had a VCOG administrative meeting I attended. I too, along with the rest of us, went to the Arneo Park reopening, and the Park District did a really good job there. If you had a chance to go by, strongly recommend people go by. It's a great place to walk. It's my neighborhood park, and before it was closed, I used it quite significantly, and it was worth the wait. They did a really good job with that. I also had the pleasure last Friday to tour Moore Park College, and I encourage my colleagues or anybody out there to go out there and tour that college. It is amazing, the programs that they're doing out there. It's come a long way since I was a young student out there. They've got tremendous programs, vocational. You can really kind of find yourself, and/or if you're looking for, to kind of recalibrate what you're doing, it's a great place to go out there. It's a beautiful setting. They actually want to build an amphitheater out there, and it'd be a beautiful seating for an outdoor amphitheater there. They have a new program, cybersecurity, out there, and their graduates, I believe it's a certificate program, but all of their graduates get offered a job, and what they start out with is a whole lot more money than I made when I was their age. Let me tell you, it's pretty significant. But there's a lot of really neat programs out there that people can really enhance their lives. So it was very impressive. Again, if you have time to do it, it's very much worth doing. And I just want to talk a little bit about transit, and I have a family member that lives down in LA, and I do get a lot of comments, and I know that our representative does a fantastic job there, but the public safety is a big issue with that as well. And I know that it's probably forever changed with COVID about, working out of your home and whatnot, but I really believe in public transit, and my hope and my desire is that there's a very bright future on that. I know they're working extremely hard to make sure that happens, and they've come a long way. I mean, my gosh, in the last 20 years, what they've done is pretty amazing too, until COVID came, and that kind of was a little bit of a divot, but I really believe that it's going to, it's going to prosper at some time. It's going to be different, but I think that there'll be some real great opportunities to improve that. I do chair VCOG, and if anybody doesn't have anything going on tomorrow, we do have a meeting here at 4 o'clock, and Dr. Mark Schnapp is going to be here. And he's an economist, and he's one of these economists that he doesn't bore you. He doesn't put you to sleep with a bunch of data that average people like me, kind of have to really think through. But he's going to do an economic forecast of Ventura County. So it's going to be at 4. I'll try to get a copy of it. We don't necessarily televise the meetings, but I'm kind of excited about him being here. And I'll, at the very least, bring back a report for the council and, our citizens here about what he has to say. So that's 4 o'clock here tomorrow in our council chambers here. So that's all I have.
All right, meetings attended for me really quick. Saturday, June 25th, I attended summer concerts at the park, got to introduce the Tribe Band. I understand why they're called the Tribe Band, because there's a lot of members, and they all take turns singing different songs that are like chart toppers from the last 40 years. So that was really cool. And June 26th, with Mr. Tremblay, I attended the Pleasant Valley Historical Society groundbreaking. Monday, June 27th, the Utilities Committee meeting. Mr. Tremblay already kind of covered that. We met with the Metropolitan Water District Director and several members of his staff. Wednesday, June 29th, attended via Zoom the Farm Bureau of Ventura County. Gave something in regards to, they talked about the ag order. Thursday, June 30th, I attended the Naval Construction Group 1 Change of Command, it's CBs, which was actually really cool. I've never attended one of those. Went with our city manager. We were, I think, one of only 2 cities that actually decided to come out and attend that, and I think it was really they called us out, and we're very appreciative of our attendance and our support. Captain or Commander Reith Miller, who was relieved by Captain Menno, gave a really terrific speech. I can't say nothing more than that, but it was a very, very, really good speech. Monday, July 4th, I simply enjoyed the fireworks, like everyone else I hope did. And Saturday, July 9th, I attended everyone up here attended the grand reopening of our Neal Ranch Park, and I will simply say that is one of my favorite parks and will continue to be, and it looks only more beautiful than it was. So that was a great job by Pleasant Valley Recreation and Park District. Mrs. Craven.
Okay, I'm going to report on 4 weeks' worth of meetings because I wasn't at the last council meeting. So on June 10th, I attended a CASA State Legislative Committee by Zoom. On the 13th, an RDP board meeting where we reaffirmed the board membership for the coming year, and we approved the budget. On the 14th, the CASA Federal Legislative Committee meeting. On July 7th, I attended an RDP general meeting. And this afternoon at 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, I attended a Contract Cities Legislative Committee meeting. And at that committee meeting, we discussed several bills. Some were new that we hadn't discussed before. I'll give you the bill numbers in case anybody's interested, but I'm going to pass this along to staff to see if the city is interested in taking positions on any of these things. One is SB 197, Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, a housing bill that was fast-tracked. Somehow it was signed within 2 weeks of its coming up. It extended the deadline for, I think he said, housing elements to be extended. And whether it affects us or not, I know we have ours in the works. I think it would be good to send a thank you letter to the governor and to people who voted on this and moved it forward, because they did something for cities. When they do something good for us, we need to thank them. We complain a lot to the legislature, so I just think that even though it's done deal, we need to, it'd be really good to thank them for doing that for cities. Another one is 1857 on solid waste, and the committee unanimously opposed that one. Then there was SB 833 Dodd, the Legislative Committee, Community Energy Resilience Act of 2022. We support that. And with no surprise, a Scott Wiener bill, SB 1186. We unanimous, no, it wasn't unanimous, but we did oppose that one. And then I thought there was another one. SB 1100 Cortese, open meetings, orderly conduct. We support it, but we really don't understand why the current Brown Act doesn't work in the situation of people who are interrupting meetings, making sure there's no decorum in the meeting. And so anyway, it's something that it's apparently something that's happening right now in LA County. There's a group of people who are going from one meeting to another and interrupting, disrupting, doing what they can to prevent a government agency, board, or council from completing the work it's supposed to complete on an agenda. And this is to resolve that. So it's getting late. Do you want the history lesson now or later?
Yeah, I think
Now?
everyone says
Okay.
now.
When I came back, I had already intended to do this, but I noticed there were some letters to the paper while I was gone on affordable housing, and so I think it's a good time to talk about this. I believe it was 1982 when my friend Gene Scott and I convinced the Camarillo City Council to adopt a general plan goal which said that affordable housing was to be dispersed throughout the city and not concentrated in one part of town. The point of that policy was to make sure that the city did not create a large area where all low-income people would live. Council members did not want large parts of town that would be maintained to a lesser standard than other neighborhoods. That was shortly after the growth control initiative, known as Measure A, was overwhelmingly passed by the voters. It said that low-income housing was exempt from its requirements, from the allotment process. 2 years later, Gene Scott and I convinced the council to put an Article 34 referendum on the ballot. Article 34 of the California Constitution says that a city cannot spend money on affordable housing unless more than 2/3 of the voters in an election approve it. With so many housing mandates that the legislature has passed recently, I'm not sure if Article 34 of the California Constitution requirement still holds, but if it does, this city has voter approval with no sunset. All that was before I was elected to the council. About 20 years later, the council adopted an inclusionary housing policy, which has a density bonus provision that encourages developers to work with staff to either include affordable housing within their projects or in another part of the city. Together, these items helped Camarillo get a jump start on affordable housing. Unless the property is owned by a government agency, deed restrictions that limit private property to low-income housing are for a specified period of time. When we first started all of this back in the mid-1980s, we didn't understand just how quickly time passes. We had 20-year deed restrictions for properties to remain low-income. These deed restrictions have since expired, and the properties have reverted to market value rentals and sales. Here are some examples. Shortly after I was first elected to the City Council in 1986, Pardee Construction built an entire apartment complex, Camino Ruiz, that was dedicated to low-income residents for a period of 20 years. They built it then that way because that complex would be exempt from Measure A, and they would still be able to receive allotments to build other houses. At the time, 20 years seemed like a really long time to require owners to rent at lesser amounts. About that same time, there was a condominium complex across from the Boys and Girls Club, as well as 20 units of single-family houses on Walker Streets that had 20-year that they were called first-time homebuyer properties, and all were deed restricted to people with lower incomes for 20 years. A few years later, Adolfo Mobile Home Park converted from being a rental mobile home park to ownership lots, and the city used 2 programs to assist 29 low-income renters to buy their lots. Those have also expired. Additionally, 67 units of rental in the rental complex on Paseo Camarillo, the one that's known as Camarillo Oaks, had restricted rents for 20 years. Unfortunately, all of these deed restrictions have expired, and the units returned to market value. When we approved them, it seemed like a long time, but when it came time for them to expire, looking back, it was a flash in the pan. We learned. More recently, the time limitations have been much longer. We changed to a deed-restricted time of 55 years for ownership units, and that time period renews with a change of ownership. So if one person or entity continues to own the property for the full 55-year term, the deed restriction will expire. However, if the property is sold, the restriction will renew for another 55 years, and the deed restriction for low-income purchasers will continue. The city's recent affordable housing rental agreements have also been for 55-year terms, but rental property does not renew with a change of ownership. But the term of the rental property does not renew with the change of ownership. So what do we have right now? We currently have a total of 1,105 units of rental housing that are privately owned, that are restricted for lower-income people, with 516 designated for low-income seniors, 586 designated for families, which could include seniors. There are also 157 units of owner-occupied property designated for lower-income people. Again, those units are embedded in apartment and condominium complexes and housing tracts, and nobody really knows which units they are. Of those, 59 units are at Village at the Park, and in Springville, there are 139 units designated for low-income families and 103 units designated for low-income seniors. In addition to those 1,105 units, the Housing Authority of Ventura County provides vouchers to tenants with very low incomes to write down the cost of units they rent. Currently, there are 519 households in Camarillo that have such assistance, including 131 families, 178 seniors, and 210 disabled households. While there are many people who are having a hard time meeting their rent and mortgage payments, I feel that the city of Camarillo has made great strides in helping people who live here and work here remain here. That's it.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, we are going to recess, and we will reconvene for our 7 o'clock session. All right, so this time we'll stand in recess. All right, we're going to reconvene the meeting of the Camarillo City Council. First on our 7 o'clock agenda is public comments. This is general public comments, opportunities for the public to speak on anything that is not on the agenda. I already have 2 comment cards for general public comment. Thank you. And I'll call you up in the order I received them. Patricia McGarry. And so everyone knows how public comment works. There's going to be a timer in front of me and a timer below you at the podium. Please speak into the microphone. As you start, that'll count down, starting from 3 minutes down. At 1 minute, you're going to get a buzz and a yellow light. Don't let that interrupt you. Keep on going. And then once it gets to 0, I'll ask you to conclude your comments, and so that way it's fair and equitable for everyone. Take it away.
Hello, my name is Tricia McGarry, and I wanted to speak on the treatment of the homeless here in Camarillo. Just today I read an article about a gentleman who was helped, and I personally know this gentleman. There were some untruths in this article, and it leaves me wary about what's going on regarding the homeless in this area. First, those in oversized vehicles are being pushed out to places that are on the outskirts in between fields by the waste management plant. And then we are written tickets that they know we cannot pay as we are in the situation we are in. And the spirit of Martin versus Boise, I am sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware of Martin versus Boise, is that the homeless cannot be punished for being homeless. And there are fees trying to be charged by the DMV, by the city, by everybody, and we've been trying to reach out even to the DMV through emails, in which we even carbon copied Captain Matthews on, in which they refused to prove that they had a contract with us. And so now I have stress and anxiety every time I need to go get food for my family or do laundry or simple tasks that I just need to survive, because I have to worry that I'm going to be pulled over for not having the right stickers. Then we've reached out to Project Hope, and they keep asking us for ways to help and ways to help. And then when we reach out to tell them the ways they can help, we do not get calls back, we do not get emails back, we do not get texts back. We try reaching out different ways, and it's really taking, the heart out of everything. And we've tried to reach out for injustices, and we've had issues with officers maybe not being officers for the CHP, and we reached out for help on that, and nobody will help us out with trying to figure out that. And there were some court issues that happened where somebody illegally pretended to be me and extended a court case. And I believe it to be somebody in the courthouse, and we reached out and I asked the officers, I talked to several people at the police department, and nobody said they would help me to write a report against these people and start an investigation. I even called the FBI trying to start a case against this. So it really feels like a roles for me, but not for thee. It's like, you want to talk about helping out the homeless and doing everything for us, and then I am here as a mother of 7 living in her vehicle asking for help.
Thank you, Patricia. Timothy McGarry?
Good evening, council members, mayor. I hold in my hand, this is a copy of the Constitution of the state of California and of the United States of America. I'm sure every one of you on that dais, with possibly the city attorney being excluded, as well as Captain Matthews over there, has sworn an oath to uphold and protect these documents. Now, I know for a fact that I have an inalienable right, cannot be taken, inalienable right to be secure in my persons. I know that I have an inalienable right to ingress and regress. This city has been noticed by the DOJ in 2018 for the Ventura County Sheriff's actions against the homeless, utilizing this city's ordinances to harass the homeless. And I am telling you, I am informing you that on the citizens of Camarillo's dime, I think it's somewhere around 350,000 for Matthews, or that might be Tennyson. But on the citizens of Camarillo's dime, there are still these very same injustices happening. Your ordinances are being used against the spirit of the law to harass those in the lowest position in your city. I spoke to several other members of the homeless community that I liaison with, and they told me, Tim, don't do it. Don't go there. You're going to put a target on your back. I have 5 children. I can't hide. There are people too scared to come up here and talk to you about the Ventura County sheriffs and their Project Hopeless, that we don't know where the money's going. I spoke to a wonderful man with the city, Alonzo Ramirez. He was very professional, he was very kind, and he was very competent. And I am quite surprised, because that is the exception at this point. He informed me who I could talk to about the monies going into Project Hope. So I contacted Sergeant Baxter and Captain Henderson, who still have not contacted me back. We pay Deputy Jason Havelka $220, I think last year it might have been reaching into $230,000 a year, but the public doesn't have access to see these funds, how they're being used, how they're being utilized, whether it's efficient, anything of the sort. So I'm letting this council know that I will be looking in, and any accountants here in the city, any retired accountants who would love to get nerdy with numbers, let's look into the receipts.
Thank you, Tim. All right, anyone else want to speak on public comments? Anything not on the agenda? Seeing no one come forward, we're going to go on to our only item on our 7 o'clock, and that is item U. We moved from our 5 o'clock to our 7 o'clock, the Adolfo Road and Camino Ruiz traffic concerns. And I believe we have a report.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This item is regarding traffic concerns at the intersection of Adolfo Road and Camino Ruiz, circled in green on the map. In 2020, during public comment on the EIR for the Residential Plan Development Project RPD 201, labeled here at the southeast corner of Verdugo Way and Camino Ruiz, traffic safety concerns and requests were received from nearby residents regarding pedestrians crossing Adolfo Road and vehicles eastbound on Adolfo making U-turns at Camino Ruiz. The requests included installation of a traffic signal with marked crosswalks and no U-turn signs. A little closer up view of the location and some description of the area. The posted speed limit on Adolfo is 45 miles per hour in this stretch, and there are stop signs on Camino Ruiz on both approaches to the intersection with Adolfo. There are no stop controls or crosswalks on Adolfo Road at Camino Ruiz. In response to the traffic concerns and requests, staff has performed site observations, traffic data collection including vehicle and pedestrian counts and patterns, and performed a check for reported traffic collisions. The collected data showed that neither traffic signal control nor all-way stop control is warranted at this intersection based on criteria in the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, or the California MUTCD, which is the city's uses that, which is the nationally accepted standard approved by the Federal Highway Administration for analyzing warrants for stop controls at intersections. The traffic data was collected on multiple days for eastbound Adolfo Road at Camino Ruiz, which revealed a low percentage of drivers making U-turns, with 5% in the morning and about 12% in the afternoon of drivers eastbound in Adolfo making U-turns at Camino Ruiz. A check on reported traffic collision data from the past 5 years revealed no collisions with vehicles or pedestrians involving eastbound U-turning vehicles. Considering the collected data and lack of reported traffic collision history, staff does not recommend restricting U-turns at this intersection. The pedestrian data collected through field observations did not reveal a large enough pedestrian volume to justify installation of a striped crosswalk across Adolfo Road. Additionally, there is an existing striped crosswalk across Adolfo Road at the signalized intersection at Santa Rosa Road, which is approximately 900 feet west of Camino Ruiz, as shown on the upper left part of the map. This item was presented to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on February 23rd of this year, where the findings were discussed, but concurrence was not reached on what steps, if any, should be taken, so the committee referred the item for consideration by the full council. I'll add that the adoption of the local road safety plan was timely tonight in that it presented a comprehensive approach to looking at locations that are on the high priority list for addressing traffic safety concerns. And I'll note that this location was not included in the list of high priority intersections, both based on community engagement, input, and also the review of reported collision and traffic data over that 5-year period that the LRSP covered. So with that, concludes my report, and staff is available for questions.
Questions, my colleagues? Kevin? Yep.
Yeah. So the report that we got earlier tonight is a living document. And, my experience is that once a development has been built, that there is an opportunity to revisit that just to see whether or not what, the true traffic flows are with concurrence of what the matrix actually shows what it is. But there's been several projects around the city through the years that we've actually collected data over the years and given us an opportunity to pivot if in fact that's what might be warranted here. Would that also be something that would be in place in this particular project as well?
Yes, and actually, as part of our standard ongoing efforts, as was highlighted in the LRSP presentation, even independent of that plan, our ongoing practice is when there are concerns raised or situations that rise to the level of accidents occurring, on our continual review of those types of things, any location within the city is looked at on an as-needed basis. And then, as you mentioned specifically, where there is planned and then installed development that occurs, both planned for a development where there's future signals, say, required if warranted. We've had instances where those signals are indeed warranted and installed. Case in point on Ponderosa at Camino Tierra Santa and Earl Joseph. That was exactly the situation there with that planned development in Springville. Other locations where it panned out that the signal was not warranted, and we've released securities and obligations of developers where the signal is not warranted based on actual traffic data. So yes, short answer is that plan is a living document in concert with our continued efforts at any location that rises to the level of needing to analyze, collect data, perform warrants, as we did at this location, and the results are what's been presented tonight.
Additional question, Mrs. Craven?
Yes, you mentioned something about the state standards and the warrants. Could you explain why we follow the state standards and the advantages or disadvantages of not following them?
Correct. Yeah, for a number of reasons. One being liability for implementing controls on traffic, vehicles, and pedestrians so that it is done in a justified, warranted fashion to implement those kinds of controls only where improvement and change can be affected for exactly that, for improvement and for enhanced safety. So that's why, and again, that's a national standard that's developed that California, like California does, has their own special treatment of that standard to create the California version of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. So it provides a basis on which an agency, the state, the city, can follow for consistency, both across the state, but then also definitely within the city, that we follow those standards to create the measures that are needed where they're needed, but also not implementing measures where they're not called for, can create worse impacts than striving to achieve some perceived improvement.
Thank you.
Additional questions before I go to public comment? No, okay. We'll take public comment. For the record, we had now 3 nonverbal comment cards. These are being passed around amongst my colleagues so we can read them. For public comment cards, I have Vincent Hopkins. Vincent, you were here earlier when I kind of explained the rules for public comment. The same ones apply. You'll get 3 minutes. It'll count down. At 30 seconds, you'll get a yellow sign and a buzzer. Don't let that distract you. Carry on through. And at 0, I'll just ask you to conclude your comments.
Okay. Thank you. I was a part of the video conference back a couple of months ago, and I know towards the end of it, Tony Tremblay said, we need to accelerate this program to study what's going to happen when, well, we know what's going to happen. There's another planned large development. It doesn't show on the map that I have. You could put that other one back up if you can. I wish I had a laser pointer. But there's another, it's down here on Verdugo at Camino Ruiz, another huge complex. It's going to even more complicate our intersection at Camino Ruiz and Adolfo Road. It's already been bad. It's been bad for years. Now, it may not show up on your studies, but again, it misses the forest for the trees, this state study, and it doesn't show what pedestrians have to go through. You don't show that at the top of Adolfo Road there at Santa Rosa, that's a hill. That's a much higher elevation than where Camino Ruiz is. Camino Ruiz. So the cars start up there at 45 miles an hour, and they're accelerating down that hill. We've had cars go through our intersection so fast, probably around 60 miles an hour, that they lost control and then knocked down a light standard and went off into the other lane on Adolfo. We had one of the residents there. She had to appear before the sheriff's department and tell them what she saw at the wreck. Children don't have a chance getting across there. Do you realize that in the what you would call the movie theater parking lot area, there are like a Jamba Juice and movies, and there's doctors' offices, and these kids have no chance to get across there. I mean, they run, and it's nerve-wracking to watch it happen. I've even seen women with strollers and kids following them, going to the middle island, trying to jaywalk this thing and get across. So I've lived here for 30 years. It was 35 miles an hour when we first moved in, and when it moved up to 45, it got crazy. And then all of a sudden, people started doing U-turns. I was standing next to the traffic engineer and on Adolfo Road at the island, and he was counting the U-turns, and after he was sitting there in his truck, and he rolled down the window. He says, "Look at this. I just counted 14 U-turns in 17 minutes. It's crazy if you're a pedestrian." Now, everyone moved in. A lot of people moved in because they thought this was a walkable city, and this isn't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hopkins.
People get in their cars and have to drive there.
Next up is going to be Danette Hopkins.
Thank you. I've lived here with my husband and I for 30 years, and I get out and I walk and I run. And as I do that, I don't listen to music, so I study traffic patterns. And the speed limit on Adolfo Road between Mission Oaks and Santa Rosa Road is 35 miles an hour. And yet, once you get through the intersection at Santa Rosa Road, you're actually going down a hill, and the speed limit increases to 45 miles an hour. And so I know that into the apartments that are there, the Camino Ruiz Square apartments, the main entrance used to be on Adolfo Road, but they closed that entrance down because they were concerned that traffic would back up in that left-hand turn lane and that someone would plow into them coming down Adolfo Road. And so we all know that Adolfo Road, you know, further down is a racetrack. And it's really concerning because there's a lot of people within between Santa Rosa Road and Adolfo Road. You've got the townhomes and these apartments that are going in and the apartments that exist there, and then us in the houses behind there. And the intersection at Los Pueblos, which is just beyond ours down Adolfo, Los Pueblos to Santa Rosa, the speed limit there is 35 miles an hour. And that's a really good speed. And so I really think that traffic should slow down at Adolfo at that intersection, Los Pueblos. There also is the Ventura County Office of Education that's at Adolfo Road and Los Pueblos. And just beyond that is now a school, Titan Academy. And so I really think that if we reduce the speed down to 35 miles an hour from 45, that would be a really good common sense approach so that people could cross that intersection and so that we were able to walk throughout our community. And so I really would like to see that happen. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. Those are the only two comment cards I had. Did anyone else here want to speak on this agenda item? All right, then I will turn back to my colleagues. Any additional questions or comments? Ms. Santangelo?
Yeah, I have more questions. Were the original concerns about this traffic and pedestrian related? I'm trying to figure out like what the, is the issue pedestrians or is it car traffic? Or, I mean, obviously I know they're related,
Right.
but how did this come to, be recognized or brought to our attention?
Right. As attached in the agenda item is the public comments that were submitted during the EIR process. Yes, includes both pedestrian and vehicular concerns, traffic concerns, largely focused on pedestrian crossing at that location, being of concerns with vehicles through traffic and vehicles U-turning at Camino Ruiz if there's pedestrians crossing there also at the same time. So that was back in 2020 during the EIR process of the entitlement of that project that was eventually adopted and approved. The EIR, the traffic analysis, the traffic study showed that having no impacts to this intersection. It was an intersection that was studied as a part of the EIR and the traffic impacts. And with the proposed project, the traffic analysis showing that it would function at level of service B, so with no impacts or no mitigation required at this location.
As for the apartment complex.
That's correct, yes.
Right.
Yeah, the RPD 201.
And could you explain a little bit about what is required to change speed limits?
Sure, yeah, good point. And actually, I'll reference also, and it's probably been a couple years when, but it was a different time than these EIR comments, but about speeding on that section of the Adolfo specifically. It was mentioned at council. And as we do as part of our normal process in coordination with the police department, They actually deployed their speed radar trailer out there at that location to monitor speeds, along with some targeted or focused enforcement, patrolling and enforcement. So that did occur, and the collection of speed data at that time confirmed our regular, which we do every 5 years or so, verifying the posted speed limits. It confirmed that the 85th percentile, or 85% of the vehicles there, were within 5 miles an hour of the posted speed limit. So both our regular review of posted speed limits and that specific, site-specific deployment of the radar trailer from the PD confirmed that, and it also did confirm that it did pick up speeders, as everywhere that trailer, everywhere that it's analyzed, there are speeders on every road, but not to the level to where it would change or affect the posted speed limit. So speed limit is posted appropriately, that's been verified, and these kinds of requests and concerns are taken and shared with the PD. As if there is a hot spot for some reason where there's a group racing, or for some reason, then that's where some target or focused enforcement can yield some benefit there. But yeah, we've confirmed that the posted speed limit is appropriate. Did that answer the question on that process?
Mr. Kildee?
Yeah, you may have addressed this to a certain degree, but can you refresh at least my memory what the criteria is that we look for posted miles per hour on the streets? Because through the years here, we've had several instances where we've had to increase them. And can you talk a little bit about what that criteria is?
Correct. Again, another standard that's adopted is and it's actually centered around being able to enforce with radar. For radar enforcement to basically be upheld in court, the speed limit needs to be posted within 5 miles an hour, either plus or minus, of the 85th percentile of the traveling vehicles. So essentially, there's an exercise that we go through on a regular basis to verify, and we do radar speed studies and counts, and basically the speed limit is verified and posted at that the speed limit where 85% of the vehicles are traveling within 5 miles an hour of that speed. So there's going to be plenty of vehicles underneath going slower. There's going to be some that are faster, but that's the accepted per code, the accepted percentile. To then we certify that. It's an engineered report that gets certified and submitted, and it's valid in court for enforcement of that posted speed limit.
And there are some instances where that speed limit has been in effect for several years, too, that it really hasn't changed either way for several years.
That's correct. It just totally depends on the traveling public, the vehicles, and how, there are instances where the speed limit has increased over the time, over the years, based on that engineering and radar study. And then there's locations where it's been decreased also. If it shows that it's posted too high, based on the actual collected data, then it's adjusted accordingly. There's other provisions, and I'm glad the comment was made about the school, because that is a new situation with a school in that area. So staff actually is now taking a look at does the school, does the population, the age, it's a little unique. It's not your standard elementary, middle school. Anyway, we're looking at the details of that to see if possibly we could establish a school zone in that area. So that would help, at least if we could establish a lower speed limit. Again, it's when school children are present, but that could be something that we'll take a look at to see if we can implement that.
Thanks.
Mrs. Craven?
We have to go by the 85th percentile, but if there are a tremendously high number of accidents or something in there, that can be a consideration, right?
Correct. There are considerations given, and typically, usually what's creating that high level of accidents is something with road geometry or certain situations that, yes, there are provisions to be able to look at recommending a different speed limit. Our review of this location is it's really an ordinary road layout, vertical and horizontal, not calling for any special treatment.
There have been accidents, but not an unusually high number.
I'm sorry?
There have been accidents perhaps, but not an unusually high number, and the geography, or whatever you call it, of the road doesn't warrant.
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Tremblay?
Thanks. So a couple of questions. Dave, you indicated that you've confirmed, I think you stated a few minutes ago, that the posted speed limit is appropriate. But is it also accurate to say that there is nothing under law that is preventing the city from reducing that speed limit?
To definitively say nothing tonight, right here, I can't answer that. I'd have to review that code, that there are code provisions that allow changes and exceptions.
I would like, okay, speaking for myself, I would like to explore that. It's one of the four things that really in terms of potential options we're talking about and that the residents have asked about. Traffic signal, crosswalk, the no U-turn sign, and the changing of the posted speed limit. I understand the 85th percentile, but that's based upon the then current speed limit. It's not based upon what could be a lower speed limit. So the results of that 85th percentile and the deviation therefrom is based on whatever is currently posted. Correct?
Well,
In other words, just because it's been at 45 and the survey is done and it's in the 85th percentile at 45, that's, in other words, it's based upon that then current speed limit. It could also be at 35.
it's based on the actual recorded data radar speeds that are collected, and whatever the 85th percentile speed of that collected data, regardless of what the posting is.
Well, no, but wait a minute. When the data is collected, there is a posted speed limit, right? And presumably, the folks who are driving there are looking at the posted speed limit. That's what I'm getting at. As a threshold matter, isn't the existence of the posted speed limit a factor in weighing what that data is?
I think the posted speed limit would generate the data, or have an effect on generating the data.
Well, let me try it a different way. If I'm driving there and I know that the posted speed limit is 45 miles per hour, would you think it's reasonable that I might change my driving behavior on knowing that it's 45 as opposed to 35? Would a traffic engineer stipulate to that? That the behaviors in terms of driving may change based on what the speed limit is?
I think it's general that you would expect law-abiding drivers to drive at or near the speed limit.
Okay, so if that's the case, then the fact is that the then current speed limit by which the survey data is done has a significant role to play in what that data outcome ultimately is. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I would like to know, going back to the first, I would like to know whether there's anything under state law that would prevent the, and I've got some comments later on just in terms of the levels of concern, but I won't go there. I just want to ask questions right now. But I would like to know whether or not there's anything that prevents the city or would subject the city to a risk of liability exposure if it were to decrease that speed limit. And I've got some policy reasons why, but I won't go into it at this point. My second question on this, and it had to do with the no U-turn signs, and this may be a question for Captain Matthews as opposed to you, Dave, because I don't want to pick on you for all these questions. Is there anything under state law? No, let me reframe that. Is there anything under the California Vehicle Code that would prevent the city from posting no U-turn signs at Camino Ruiz and Adolfo?
No.
Okay. So could the city, hypothetically, if the council were to say so as a matter of policy, require require that no U-turn signs be posted at that location without, and there are no warrants requirements or standards of requirements for that, unlike a traffic signal, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And if that were the case and those no U-turn signs were posted, then it would be reasonable to expect that the Camarillo Police Department would enforce those. Maybe that's a Captain Matthews question.
Correct. I mean, it's a, yeah, a regulatory sign that's posted on a road is subject to enforcement.
Okay. Final question. Yeah, my understanding is that there are the standards and the warrants relative to a traffic light. There are also standards and warrants relative to placement of a stop sign, correct? Okay. And I really want to go into those, but I won't at the moment. Are there also standards or warrants relative to placement of a crosswalk?
Partly as a part of the signalized in an intersection includes the ability to install crosswalks. I guess that may look to our traffic engineer to see if he has any other.
Well, wait a minute, but assume hypothetically that there's no traffic signal there. Let's take, for example, a crosswalk that exists in Old Town, in front of the courthouse, old courthouse property. There's no traffic signal there, but there is clearly a pedestrian crosswalk with flashing lights and so on. So in that context, is there any standard under state law or warrant under state law that would prevent the city from placing whether or not it should, and there's policy, I can see the policy arguments on both sides, but is there anything under state law that prevents the city from placing a crosswalk there?
Yeah, I'd have to defer to our traffic engineer if he has that answer. We may need to look further into that, but.
Councilmember Tremblay, yes, we would have to research if there's state law, but I know that the city has a policy of where we install crosswalks, and it is based on number of students or pedestrians crossing.
I fully recognize that we may have a policy, but my question was pointed at whether or not legally, because policies can change, right? Depending on what any three members of the council say at any one time is the policy. So I just was trying to, I really wanted to focus on the legality of it. So what I'm hearing is the answer is no.
No, there are some recommendations that the state gives, but, those aren't, they're not law.
Do the recommendations in any way, if the recommendations were not, if what the city did were not consistent with the recommendations, would that expose the city to further liability in the event of an accident or injury at that intersection?
I would say yes.
Based on what?
Just based on the fact that we're doing something that's non-standard.
How would placing a crosswalk there be non-standard?
Well, if we deviate from the recommendations given by transportation studies, then it depends on how far we deviate. Of course, there's a range that we can be within, but if we install crosswalks, for instance, where there might be only 2 pedestrians crossing, then there could be an issue.
Okay, well, I may have more questions later on that one, but for now, thank you, Mr. Simoni. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Mrs. Craven. Sure.
Sorry. So I'm not giving an opinion. I'm going to state something I remember, and then I'm going to ask if that's still the case. Time was when Ponderosa had a certain speed limit posted. And a certain woman went faster and was cited. And she went to the court and said, everybody does this. And as I remember it, the court said, you're right. I go down that street and everybody goes 55 miles an hour on that street. When's the last time you did a traffic study, and when's the last time you brought Ponderosa in line with the traffic study? And the answer was, I don't know how many years. But for a certain period of time, and I think it was 2 years, no traffic citations were cited while every city in the county went and did their new traffic studies. And now we have to follow those guidelines based on the traffic studies, or we will not be allowed to cite. Is that still correct?
That's correct. And it's actually in California Vehicle Code is the requirement. Is that correct, Jason?
That is correct. And you're referring to Goulet versus the,
Judy Goulet's law.
yeah, Goulet versus the County of Ventura et al. And I
That's
believe
it.
that was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So that is still the case.
So we can't go too far below what the 85th percentile is, and that's the way, as I have always understood it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Tremblay.
But it's also correct to say that the 85th percentile is based upon a posted speed limit at a particular numerical level, correct?
Correct, but based on the pace of, the average pace of drivers driving on the road.
At that existing speed limit.
Correct, but also
Thank you.
included is the size of the road, the number of lanes, the geometry, all of that.
I'll stipulate to that. If you'll stipulate to the fact that if a driver is looking at the posted speed limit going, okay, this is the speed limit that I'm supposed to be going.
But do they allow us to say, gosh, I wonder what the 85th percentile would be if this were not 45, but 35 or 25?
No.
We're going back and forth.
Yeah, go ahead.
But of course you wouldn't. Of course you would specify this is what the existing speed limit is. The difficulty that now we're going into comment, but I mean the difficulty is the premise is on one speed limit versus what could be another speed limit. And the premise and the study is predicated upon having an extant speed limit, which in my view may be too high. So it doesn't invalidate the studies that have been done, but it certainly takes a predicate component of that study and says, and leaving it open to interpretation. So anyway.
One last question. Okay. One last question from me. Haven't we, in fact, raised our speed limits in various streets because people were going over the speed limit? There weren't a tremendous amount of accidents. We couldn't find any geographical reason to justify keeping it the same, and so we have raised the speed limits.
Yes, Santa Rosa Road is a case in point. When I worked here before, 20-some years ago, I drove that road, it was 45, and today it's posted at 50 because of that.
And if you'll notice, Ponderosa, because of what he cited, is now 45. So people don't necessarily go the posted speed limit, is that correct? I think the captain would like.
Sure. Captain Matthews, you want to opine?
Yeah, so when we cite, thank you for listening.
Can you just pull it up a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, thanks.
All right. So when we give a citation for excessive speed or unsafe speed, there's a lot of factors that we consider when we do that. So for example, we could give somebody a citation for going 45 in a 45 if the conditions are unsafe, rain, snow, sleet, traffic, that kind of thing. So the answer is yes, 45 might be too high. It might be too low. We have to justify in court why that particular speed is unsafe when we testify in court to that violation. So theoretically, if nobody's on the road and the speed limit's 40, and nobody's on the road and it's 10 o'clock at night and they're doing 50, that might not be unsafe. We'd have to justify to the judge why that is unsafe and why that's a violation. And so there are certain vehicle codes that are specifically to a speed limit. So on the highway, the 101, there's a code that says if you go over 65, it's a violation. In a city, it's not that way. There's 22-350 of the vehicle code says it's unsafe speed, and we have to justify that to the judge. So we take into perception reaction times, the speed, how long it takes to perceive a threat, how long it takes to react to that threat, and then how long it takes to actually come to a stop before you hit that threat. And so there's a lot of things that go into the basic speed law in conjunction with all the engineering and the education as well. Does that help a little bit? Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Santangelo, you had a question?
Dave, help me remember. I thought that we actually lowered a speed limit about 3 years ago.
Yeah, you're right.
Daily?
And Jason can help me with that. I believe I'm gonna try. It's daily drive
Yeah.
between Las Posas and Calle La Roda.
And that was based on a study done with a posted speed limit.
Correct.
So there's an example of, even although I understand, Mr. Tremblay, what you're saying, I still think, though, that people drive the way they feel safe. And that's not necessarily what that number is up on that sign. So I think these studies look at what people are actually doing. And yes, there's obviously, some impact from a posted speed limit, but I think that if there was a speed limit, a posted speed limit that was really off from what the drivers were comfortable doing, that would show in these studies. So I just wanted to say that, even though we do have those, we have made changes. So obviously, the effect of the posted speed limit wasn't strong enough to overcome the difference in how they were driving.
I have a question or two of my own, if I may. The speed limit on Adolfo Road from Santa Rosa going down to that dead end is currently 45? Has it ever been anything less?
I don't know. I don't know if Jason knows off the top of your head if there's been any difference.
There was during public comment, there was a reference to, I thought it was 1.35.
That's correct.
It was at 1.35, then it became 45. I presume that happened as a result of one of these studies.
Yes.
Right.
I don't know of any other way it would otherwise happen, right? Okay. I'm kind of referencing the LRSP that we had earlier tonight, where it talked about there are certain physical conditions in roads that lend themselves to drivers to take either unsafe actions or to be reckless or whatever, cause them to operate their vehicle in a manner that either is unsafe or potentially raises the risk of an accident of some sort. Could it also be, and this is always the issue I've kind of had with this one study, and I know we've referenced it, we've had lots of these studies, the 85 percentile. If you have a road whose physical features already kind of lend itself to people to drive at a high rate of speed, then doesn't it kind of, it kind of manifests itself? I mean, just, the LRSP that we had this evening said that we have to physically change certain conditions of roads if we want to better contain how drivers operate on them. Could we not, and should we not look at ways where we can also do that here? I know it's discretionary as to whether or not 45 miles is safe or unsafe, but to Mr. Tremblay's point, could we not do something to entice drivers, not entice, but encourage them some way, unknowingly encourage them to drive at a slower speed?
Sure, yeah.
If that is our desired effect?
Right, and that's the crux of the matter is the desired effect to slow people down for the sake of slowing them down, or is it correcting an unsafe situation and a documented unsafe situation, as we've done in the LRSP with data collection to highlight those areas and those intersections and segments that should be focused on because there's a high rate of accident, of a need for improved safety. Our opinion at this location is there is no need to apply any of that.
I've asked this question not Not in the context of what some of the public speakers brought in this evening, although one mentioned of it. The most common complaint I get in regards to road safety, at least in Mission Oaks, is late at night, and the fact that that portion of Adolfo Road is used as a drag strip, usually on Friday or Saturday nights. I hear it from so many people. I have a coworker who lives right in that neighborhood, and he admits that he can hear it oftentimes at night. In that context, I've asked in the past whether there's something we can do to somehow discourage. The police can only be so many places. Captain Matthews could sit on that on Adolfo, but that's probably not a good utilization because the amount of calls they get and the other things they have to respond to. But are there not things that we can do to discourage at least that? I've raised that question before.
Yeah, not really anything I can think of off the top of my head, because in the big picture of things, the roadway network, including signals and stop signs, the focus of all of that is to move traffic as efficiently and safely, including vehicles and pedestrians, as possible. So to apply some type of restriction to dissuade racers to go down there in the middle of the night, whether it's narrowing it down to 2 10-foot lanes, which doesn't give them enough room, addressing that situation, yet the need is for the lanes to be as they are for the traffic that travels that for the majority of the day on a daily basis, right? Again, that whole approach of a roadway network that's designed and operated for the most efficient and safe passage of all vehicles. So, there could be extreme measures taken, probably to cause them to go somewhere else is likely what will happen, not prevent it from happening at all. So that's a challenging situation with doesn't have an easy answer.
At our last meeting, I brought up the issue of Fieldcrest Drive, which is right down the street from Tierra Linda, and I had received complaints of residents saying that between, was it Wood Creek and say Las Colinas, or before that bend actually was at Butterfield, there was kind of a high rate of speed. And staff had suggested that or actually was already pursuing, signs that pretty much display one's speed and notify you when you're exceeding the speed limit. Could we not, and that doesn't require any warrants or really it's discretionary, we can do it at will. Could we not do something like that here?
Correct, yeah, and I believe the information provided to council on that included the fact that these are installations that can be moved. So this would be a tool that we have to be able to move to other locations, and we can look at even acquiring some more of those signs. We probably, I wouldn't recommend having 100 of them around the city, right? I mean, although there's probably 100 roads that it would, could be effective, but the key is to keep the awareness at a higher level. So, yeah, absolutely, this is a location that we can look at moving those at some point.
Too many flashing lights is almost seizure-inducing.
Right.
Yeah, I have those all around town, but. Mrs. Craven?
No, I have
Okay.
a question when we're finished with all the speed limit stuff. I've got another question about what's been talked about, but it has nothing to do with speed limits. I don't think. The answer may relate it, but.
Okay. Any additional questions? I mean, we're already kind of into commentary as well, but.
Well,
I defer to you, Mrs. Craven.
no, there was a lot of talk about U-turns. So first of all, I want to know what's wrong with the U-turn if it's not posted? And second of all, is that presenting a traffic hazard in some way? Or is the street too narrow for places to have U-turns? I'm not understanding what it is about U-turns. It just was stated people make U-turns. So
Right.
what's the issue?
The see if I can find it where it actually says it in the comments, but I'll just summarize in general with as was noted, pedestrians crossing there may encounter a vehicle making a U-turn at the same time, and be perceived as an unsafe situation if a pedestrian is crossing Adolfo at Camino Ruiz at the same time that especially eastbound vehicles, and they do, our data shows there are U-turns, again, relatively low percentage of the total vehicles, but that U-turns are made there. So it's, our understanding of the concern is when a pedestrian is there at the same time a U-turn is being made, the potential for a unsafe situation occurs. And the U-turns can be made safely at that location, at Camino Ruiz. And as Councilmember Tremblay pointed out, and we acknowledge that there isn't anything prohibiting the placement of a no U-turn sign. That can be done. Our concern with that is a couple things. And back to the big picture of efficient flow of traffic, including patterns that have been established and are occurring at a safe manner. How you quantify safe is difficult with perception and possibly near misses, but we use data to look at, is there unsafe situations happening there based on accidents, and there isn't any data there to say that's unsafe for U-turns to occur at that location. So there's an established pattern of safe U-turns being made there, and so we would, staff hesitates to change that. If I can add a couple specifics to that, and this is the left turn pocket that the U-turns are made at for eastbound Adolfo traffic. Say it was posted no U-turn, and that established pattern of traffic goes into the left turn pocket to make a U-turn.
They're going to go into the neighborhood.
They happen to be a law-abiding citizen. They'll make that left turn into the neighborhood. If they're a law-abiding citizen, they'll violate the no U-turn and make a U-turn, probably safely. The other possibility is if somebody enters into that left turn pocket under established pattern to make a U-turn, sees the no U-turn sign, and pops back out into the through lane to go down to another location to either turn right or another U-turn further down at Los Pueblos. In our opinion, that's creating more of an actual reality of an unsafe situation, especially with, if you've ever been frustrated with driving and you can't go where you want to go, you tend to go faster and less safe. So that's the concern with implementing a no U-turn prohibition there, that in our opinion is not going to, that there isn't a situation that needs to be improved by doing that.
Okay, thank you.
I think we've exhausted the question portion.
I got my questions answered.
I think so.
And now we enter the commentary, although we've already touched the edge of that, but Mr. No, it's okay. Do you want to lead us off? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Sean. And great questions. And I really enjoy, if that's, the back and forth.
You're an attorney.
I appreciate the back and forth. So here's where I'm coming from. I grew up in an area where my parents were in the same home for roughly 60 years. And during the first 20 years or so on while I was there, they saw traffic in their area, and they were, 75 yards away from a major arterial. They saw that traffic grow exponentially in terms of safety, in terms of volume. And the safety concerns were dramatically increased during that time. The parallel here is that last year, I anticipate that the level of traffic at Adolfo and Camino Ruiz is going to materially increase because of new housing development in that area. We have new 350 units, I believe, or 385 units at Camino Ruiz. We've got the Tessa Robles project, which is already in place and already occupied. because of new development in that area. And part of it is because we've got a residential area immediately adjacent to what, and we're slowly transforming, and I don't want to relitigate it because we had a difference of opinion on whether or not to move forward with that apartment property, but right next to a residential area, immediately adjacent to a commercial/industrial area. And that creates some tensions. I think what I'm having a hard time reconciling is, and respectfully, I did not agree with the traffic study at that time. I thought the impacts were understated, respectfully, but I don't want to relitigate that. What I do think is happening is that intersection is going to start getting really busy. I can't quantify it, but it's going to get really busy in the upcoming years, particularly when that apartment project is constructed. And even more folks are using that intersection either to, A, turn west on Adolfo to go up to Santa Rosa, or, frankly, turn right to go down Adolfo and then left on Los Pueblos and out Santa Rosa to ingress out Santa Rosa if they're commuting out to the 23. So I'm having some real difficulty reconciling the fact that and I think it's a reasonable expectation, I think it's a legitimate concern by these residents, a reasonable expectation that that intersection is going to see material increase in activity in the next several years, but we're not doing anything about it. And that's my level of discomfort. And the four things that I can identify right now would be, a traffic signal, which we're not going to be able to do because of a traffic warrant or standards issue. I get that. The crosswalk is difficult because, if you have a crosswalk, you don't want to give a false sense of security by folks crossing it, that the crosswalk will prevent people from them having an accident within that crosswalk. On the other hand, I'm concerned that folks have to go all the way up to Santa Rosa and Adolfo, up that hill 900 feet to the north, or to the west, I guess, in order to cross over. It just doesn't appear to be as efficient as I think it is. And frankly, the fact is we've got that residential area immediately abutting a commercial area. There are two things that I think we can do. One is I do think that and Dave, I'll go back and repeat a comment that you made. You indicated just a few minutes ago, you articulated, well, patterns that have been established at an intersection. And I would submit to you that we've got patterns that are about to change at that intersection because of the development projects we've approved. So just because we've had patterns established in that area, respectfully, to me, doesn't mean that we can't change things up. What I would ask that we consider is, given that the no U-turn, the difficulty for pedestrian safety, the potential for an unsafe situation, I think, to use Dave's words, relative to the no U-turn sign, or relative to U-turns, I think we should install no U-turns signs at Adolfo and Camino Ruiz on both the, I don't know what that is, Jason, Dave, north and west, anyway, right in that median strip area, wherever you do it. And then I think we should also look at the possibility or the potential for lowering the speed limit in that area with a report back to us, which will answer my question as to whether or not we are prevented by state law from doing that, because I don't think we got an answer to that question, that specific question. The crosswalk, I'm not quite sure what to do with that right now. There's no crosswalk all the way down Adolfo, all the way down. I don't think there's a crosswalk all the way down Adolfo, correct? All the way down to the west. There's no crosswalks across there. But on the other hand, although there is speeding on Adolfo, I think the majority of the traffic on Adolfo, would you say it's between Santa Rosa and Los Pueblos?
I'd have to review the traffic counts.
I'd like to review the traffic counts. So anyway, those are the two things that I think we should consider. And I know there are a lot of different ways to look at this. I guess the primary thing that just concerns me is there's going to be a lot happening in that area, and I don't want us to stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it's not happening.
Mrs. Craven?
I liken this to a couple other places in town. Periodically, we get complaints from people about the crossing, I think it's Calle La Roda and Ponderosa. There are a lot of apartments on Calle La Roda and Daly, and they have a lot of children who go to, what is it, Las Posas School? Las Posas School. And the people who call and who come and talk to us periodically talk about how those children can't cross at Calle La Roda because there's no signal, there's no crosswalk, and they feel that we should do something there. What we've always told them is the children really need to go up to Las Posas and then turn to the right and get to the school that way. Another place that's kind of similar where people want to cross a street when there's no suggested way to cross is from the senior citizen complex that wraps around the condominium complex that's across from the Boys and Girls Club. The senior citizens like to take the shortest route, so they want to cross Ponderosa. And their choices are to go down to Temple and cross there, or to go up to Arneal and cross there. There's really no place there to put a crosswalk because there's a median all the way and there aren't any streets. And that's just kind of the way it is. And they have all figured out how to deal with this. Now, in the situation of an upcoming apartment, we have no idea when those apartments are going to be completed or filled or anything else. I would say once those apartments are occupied, keep a really eagle eye on it, and if a problem develops, bring it to us before a 5-year traffic count. Take a good look at it. But I think we can't sit here and say, oh gosh, we think these people are going to create a problem and try to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So I just don't see where there's a need to do anything right now to wrap it up.
Thank you very much. Ms. Santangelo?
So it is absolutely reasonable that we want the safest intersections and streets, and as a council member, I take that responsibility on as well. And I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but I think I'm agreeing with Mrs. Craven that I haven't really heard of a problem other than high volume. And especially today, coming off of the presentation from the I'm going to get the acronym wrong, the road safety plan. You know, we all talked about how incredibly helpful that data was and the analysis of that data, which really helped us identify unsafe areas, segments of roads and intersections. And, you know, this intersection was nowhere on that radar. That doesn't mean that your perspective and your concerns about that area aren't justified, as you live there and you're seeing the behavior from the drivers. I'm concerned. I'll go through a couple of the proposed solutions one by one, but I'm concerned about a crosswalk there because coming down that hill from the intersection, people tend to gain speed going down that hill right into a crosswalk terrifies me. I don't think that intersection is a safe place to cross regardless of the volume, and that's why I don't think there should be a crosswalk there. And so putting a crosswalk there isn't going to make that intersection safer. It's just not. The conditions will still be there. I'm also looking at the potential for more cars and more traffic. And so I understand the need to want to get ahead, but I'm also concerned, the more of these mitigation measures that you put into place, the less efficient the area becomes to move traffic. And if you're going to increase the volume of cars, but we're going to put up all of these things that really aren't warranted yet, we could really negatively impact your transit as well because of the congestion created. So I think we have to be really careful. And I really actually like the suggestion that we keep an eye on this intersection, especially when these new developments happen. I can't support doing something that I don't see as warranted before we really know the extent, and that what pushes it over the edge to me is it could make it worse, and that's definitely what I don't want to happen.
Mr. Kildee?
We've had an interesting discussion on this, haven't we? I've been on the Transportation Committee several years, through my tenure on the council and dealt with issues like this several times. There's nothing new with this. There's just a couple of things to keep in mind, too. I was on the Transportation Commission group here, subcommittee, when we did change the speed limit from 35 to 45 on Adolfo. And that really concerned me. And I brought up several questions about that. My gosh, we're going to increase this, 10 miles per hour. That usually means people that like to go a little faster than posted. Usually means they go about 5 miles an hour over the speed limit there. How is that going to work? Well, through the years, people and drivers make their adjustments. I mean, it's been interesting. And I'm a person that likes to keep the speed limit lower. I'm totally in favor of that, no doubt about it. But it was always explained to me that it has to be upheld in a court of law here and has to be in the 85 percentile here. Now, does that mean that we can't revisit that we can't make some adjustments? Yes, we can, but we just have to make sure, like Mr. Matthews said tonight, that, we have to make sure that it's defensible in a court of law here, too. I'd like to do something out there. I would. A little hesitant to do something before I have enough data to make sure that whatever we do is going to help the situation there. And until I personally have the data there, I'm not prepared at this particular point to totally visit this. Now, we know that traffic's going to increase out there. There's no question about it. I mean, it's increased every time a development goes in the city, a new development, there's going to be new traffic that's generated. That's a given here. But I think we need to kind of wait a little bit here and get some more data here. And I strongly suggest that, we keep this on the radar, we keep looking at it. Whenever this is built, to do another statistical analysis. So what we do is the right thing to do, not do something just because we think it's the right thing to do. Let's try to get as much data as possible, so whatever we do has a strong possibility to be successful. And I'll use the example of Earl Joseph Drive there, and several of us got calls and a lot of feedback about the traffic there, and there was a tremendous amount of traffic, and we always said, look, we're going to visit this when that development gets, further developed, and when the traffic signals come in, and we had to wait for quite a while on that. We have the 2 traffic signals that's gone in, and we continue to monitor it, and there may be some changes that potentially we're going to do with that. But we waited until we could get a more accurate count, and that's what is kind of the challenge in all this, is do you do something right away, or do you wait until you have a better idea about what you're going to do is be successful here? So my suggestion is that we do wait a while here, let's see where this is, maybe do an analysis on the U-turns, maybe come up with another alternative if in fact we do not allow U-turns, what potential those drivers will be and how many U-turns are made during the day, how many people are actually doing that, if we could get that kind of data. But that would be my suggestion, is to keep this on the radar, collect the data, and revisit it at an appropriate time.
All right. I'm a big proponent of data. I'll be the first to admit that there's not enough data here. And the data, what data we do have doesn't necessarily warrant, say, a crosswalk or a signal intersection. At this time, I'm opposed to a crosswalk. I'd like to see a crosswalk if you had a signalized intersection. I am a believer in the whole false sense of security that a crosswalk provides. We saw that think of it, in the last few years, we've added flashing lights to in front of Camarillo High, and there's 2 crosswalks in Old Town. We had crosswalks, and we all cumulatively saw too many close calls on a daily basis. Tony, I know you and I both referenced the fact we'd be out there at Farmers Market. Now, you're out there at Farmers Market pretty regularly, and how many close calls you see. Crosswalk doesn't create a safety barrier. Cars can certainly still hit you, and it doesn't mean they're going to see you. So I am concerned about that. And I'm concerned about that because I'm aware of the speed in which cars travel on that road, which I'll get to in a second. A signal intersection, we just simply don't have the information, the data on it. It doesn't warrant it right now. I'll be, now I guess the second or third to suggest, and I think we talked about it when we approved that housing development in Camino Ruiz. I think we're all very supportive of, as soon as that reaches full occupancy, I think we were all rather supportive of, let's do a traffic study, see exactly what the implications are, and does that actually equate to what some of us fear might happen? And if it does, then we'll cross that bridge. But we have to see what those how it changes the patterns, and if those warrants are met. I'm all for, let's get that data as soon as that data is available in terms of that development and what kind of bearing it has on traffic patterns. And that's sort of, the warrants aren't there for a 4-way stop. Either I have a concern about drag racing, which is a little independent of this discussion here, but I'd really like to see us try to address the drag racing issue, and I think that can be addressed through some other means. I think that road, just the way it's designed, the fact that it's 2 lanes in the other direction, it's a 4-lane road, it's very enticing. You naturally want to drive fast on that road. Every time I'm pulling left off of Camino Ruiz onto Adolfo, I have to take an extra second because the cars are traveling fast, and they come up on you really fast. And I probably do that turn maybe once every week or every 2 weeks. But I consciously have to think about that, the speed in which those cars travel. Which gets me to the last point, my biggest concern is the speed. I do believe that the second that intersection became a 45-mile, or that road became 45 miles, I think everyone kind of drove faster now to meet that expected speed limit. If you post 60 miles an hour, you're absolutely going to get more people driving 60 miles an hour. If we posted 35, I think you're going to get people to be more conscious and slow down, although it still has that inclination to make you want to kind of drive fast. It's wide, it's straight. There's that, they're right, there's that kind of that downward, there's that curve to it, the hill. I would like to see us see what we can do to address the speed issue more than anything. And I think the speed issue is going to become, I will admit, I think the speed issue will become a much greater issue and safety issue once that development on Camino Ruiz is developed. And it inevitably will lead more people to go down Camino Ruiz, take left, go left on Adolfo. Whether it meets any kind of threshold, I don't know. I'm not one to say. That data has to bear it out. But there's certainly going to be more people, and the risk will be elevated to some degree because of the speed factor. So the speed is my biggest issue. We don't have a, I don't know if anyone else will say anything. We don't have.
Move to receive and file.
We don't have an action in front of us aside from receive and file. So there's no action we would take tonight.
There's a motion.
There's a motion. You second? Okay. Any- Yes, one comment? Sure.
I haven't made enough comments. I do, you know, we can receive and file. I do think there are two things we can do right now, which is do the no U-turn signs and also make a specific request that we have staff report back to us on the process for potentially changing that speed limit. We don't have to consider whether to change it tonight, but at least have the staff report back to us for changing the speed limit and whether or not we can change that limit under the law. You know, respectfully, I don't think we're solving a problem that doesn't exist. I think we have a problem that does exist, and I think it's going to get worse there. So, but I also recognize that I don't think there are the votes for that right at this point. So we can receive and file, but I think I'll probably just vote to oppose a receive and file because I do think there are some things we ought to do that can be minimally intrusive and minimally done tonight. So that's why I'm going to vote against the receive and file, because I do think there are some minimal steps we could take tonight.
All right, with that, we have a motion and a second. So everyone, please vote. That passes 4-1 with Councilmember Tremblay voting no. All right, with that, is there any other business? We have gone through everything on the agenda. All right, with that, we will adjourn this meeting.